Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Trusted CI webinar for March 31st, 2025. I'm your host, Jeanette Dopp-Heidi. Trusted CI is the NSF Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, and these webinars are part of its mission to deliver high-quality, actionable guidance regarding cybersecurity to the NSF community. More information about Trusted CI can be found at trustedci.org. Today's topic is the Trusted CI Operational Technology Procurement Vendor Matrix with Mark Krenz. Mark is a Chief Security Analyst at Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research and is the CISO of Trusted CI. And I've known Mark for over 10 years, I think, at this point. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Jeanette. So today we're going to be talking about the Trusted CI Operational Technology Security Question Matrix that Trusted CI made for the purpose of providing science projects and really anybody who is in the process of procuring operational technology with a list of questions that they can send off to a vendor or ask a vendor to help them understand more about the security stance of a product that they're looking to buy. Trusted CI is a cybersecurity center of excellence for NSF. Our mission is to help enable trustworthy NSF science by partnering with cyber infrastructure operators to build and maintain effective cybersecurity programs, publishing resources that are valuable to the broader NSF community, and supporting the processes, tools, and knowledge to secure NSF research progress. And we've even grown since that picture was taken about a year ago. At the end of this presentation, it would be great if some of you would be willing to share some of your own stories about operational technology procurement issues. It doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing, but it could be like challenges that you had or uncertainties you had going into it. So if you could kind of think of those as we go through those, maybe write them down or something and be ready to share them if you'd like with the group, that would be fantastic. Because we'd like to hear about, and I'm sure colleagues in the room would also like to hear about these types of things. We can all learn from each other. So what is operational technology? For a long time on the internet, we thought of internet connected devices as just being the computer on your desk or a laptop or even a phone. But of course, over the last 20, 25, even 30 years, we've started to add more and more non-traditional computing devices to the internet. Maybe it started out with a webcam, back in the 90s, people started adding webcams to the internet. But now it's up to the point where it's even like whole power grids are on the internet, and cranes and door locks and sensor grids and stuff like that are all internet connected and are at risk. It's part of an organization's attack surface. It's something that the organization has to think about securing. It's part of the infrastructure that keeps the project going, and an attack on it could affect the availability for the project, possibly leading to a power outage or some kind of denial of service in some way. And of course, these devices can be part of the science mission, from a control computer that's managing how a telescope moves, to a sensor grid that's being dropped into the ocean to actually collect water for sensing or something like that, to the navigation system on a ship, for determining what the best path is to take to collect data. So somebody noted that I should probably talk about how operational technology has been breached in the past, and there have been major incidents in the news that we've all probably seen over the years, where in some way it wasn't a breach of a traditional computer system. It was some kind of other operational technology. And maybe the first one that comes to mind is the Target breach back in 2013, where a contractor that was connecting to the HVAC, the AC system of a store, their laptop was compromised apparently, and through the HVAC network, they were able to get to the point of sale network. And so that led to a major breach for Target. And then the Ukrainian power grid was hacked back in 2015, leading to a major outage, and that was done through operational technology. The Colonial Pipeline attack, more recently, just in the last 4 years, ransomware that was affecting a system that controls how the resources are sent through the pipeline was attacked. And then just a couple of years ago, this was more of a simple attack, just using software-defined radios and a radio system. An attacker was able to stop the 20 trains on the Polish train system through just a simple radio attack. So, this is just four examples. Another one that comes to mind is that they're not. I was talking to a colleague recently, and they brought up the 2003 power outage that happened in the Northeast, that started out not from a malicious, some malicious attack, but through a backup system that the power system was dependent on. Somebody who was working on the backup system took the backup system down, went to lunch, and then there was a problem somewhere else on the grid that caused it to try to fail to the backup system, which wasn't up, and he didn't tell anybody. And this led to the cascading of the power outage that happened in 2003. There's more to it than that, but that's the gist of it. But it doesn't always have to be something malicious. It can be dependencies that are there that you're not aware of. I remember when I first bought a Nest thermostat, I was analyzing the network traffic on it. This was like about 10 years ago or so. And I noticed that the Nest thermostat was actually talking to time.apple.com. And I remember that the developers of Nest, it was a separate company by then, but the developers came from Apple. And so they probably piggybacked the network time synchronization that they had for it on Apple's time servers. So that created a dependency between the Nest thermostat and Apple's information systems. So if Nest happened to go out of business or something like that, which is something that can happen to a lot of operational technology companies, and then Apple decides that they're no longer going to allow Nest thermostats to talk to Apple, they could block it, and then you could suddenly have a non-functional thermostat. So these are kind of issues that you can run into and dependencies that you have to care about. So going through all the security issues, at least the major ones, one thing that people often run into is they install the device and then they kind of forget that it's there. Maybe the operational technology and infrastructure team puts the device in place, but then they don't tell IT about it, and everybody just kind of forgets that it's there until something happens to it, and then you remember, oh, there's that device that's been on the network all this time that hasn't been updated or something like that. The company that creates the device might not update the firmware very often, maybe going years in between updates. Maybe they don't address some kind of 0-day that comes out for the firmware very quickly. They have to go through a long process. And so your devices are vulnerable for a large window of time. The company could go out of business, or it could just be a contract that was to make one device and then they're done, and they no longer have a reason for being in business. So you don't have support of the company to be able to update that firmware at all, let alone the source code for how to modify the firmware yourself. The device might not have been built with security features in mind, for instance, like a host access system that prevents people from, allows people to block off certain IP addresses or whole networks, or allow list, a network like just one private network that's used for operational technology or something like that. As we've often seen, devices can have hard-coded passwords, like just the word password for a password, or something simple like the company name and maybe the date that the company started. It could be like a backdoor that the company put in place. And there might not be a way of changing that, so you might be stuck with this default password in the device. It might not also integrate with existing SOC tools that you have. Like, for instance, if you're monitoring hosts on your network and you want to be able to put some kind of agent on various devices, you might not have the ability to do that. It might not have the ability to log access to that device, and then maybe it does, but you might not be able to send those logs off to a centralized log management server. It might be very inconvenient to get to the logs or something like that. There could potentially be active exploits. Hackers have discovered a way to attack the device. Maybe they've released that information. Maybe somebody else has found the vulnerability that's there. The device might be actively exploited, but the company might still be selling it, and they might not have released an update for it. Also, it doesn't necessarily have to be about attacking the device itself. Those devices could be used as a jumping off point for a privileged network. We've often seen this with routers and switches and like VoIP systems and security cameras and stuff like that. They act as a way in from the internet, and then they pivot towards other more interesting targets on the internal network. And so because of all these issues, it really matters, the procurement process is really important. All too often, I found that, or we found that somebody in the organization buys a device that's essential for the organization to function, but they don't include IT or the cybersecurity team in the process until the end or until afterwards. And we find out, what we're stuck with. But if we can involve the IT and security teams a lot earlier on, and all the stakeholders a lot earlier on, we can make sure that we choose a product that will integrate well and that will understand better. Then of course the question is, well, what questions do you send the vendor? That the person who's buying the device or leadership in the organization might not send any kind of questions to it. They might just look at a product brochure and go based on what's in the product brochure. Maybe no security considerations come up at all. And so the vendor doesn't really have much pressure to address issues because they don't know what's important to an organization until after the fact. And so I think this is where we're going to have our first polling question.
Oh, I apologize. The polling questions are all in one. Do you want me to do all of them at one time?
Okay.
Then?
Yeah, sure. We can do all of them at once.
Okay. So this is a feature that I have not tried before. And so we're going to try it with Mark today. So I have 3 questions here that we developed. Have you run into an issue with a piece of equipment after procurement? Does your organization or project conduct an inventory of your operational technology assets? And does your IT support and cybersecurity program explicitly cover your OT assets, or is that in a separate group? And I have some options here. So do you want to continue, or do you want to
I'll continue
wait?
for a few slides, and maybe after the next slide or two, I'll come back to the results.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. So when Trusted CI set out to develop a list of questions in this matrix, we thought, well, what's out there already that people can use? And our first thoughts went to the HECVAT and the HECVAT Lite, and that was developed by EDUCAUSE to help basically universities and academic institutions ask questions of cloud providers so that they would only have to ask cloud providers kind of one time about these security considerations. And then those results could be shared with all the academic institutions that cared to know about the different security considerations. So along those lines, we thought we could have a similar set of questions, but tailored towards operational technology. The other thing would be just ad hoc questions as they come up from each customer, which might not include all the things that you thought of. You might think of a couple things, but there might be some other things that you're just like, oh, I forgot about that, or you don't think about until after you actually buy it and you try to integrate stuff. So we wanted to try to include as much as we thought made sense to without kind of going overboard with the number of questions. as to what an organization, a science organization, would care about. Then, of course, the other solution is to just trust the sales pitch, which probably is what happens most often. But in cybersecurity, you want to go beyond just trusting the sales pitch. You want to verify that the device does what it says it does. So quickly, I guess it looks like we've had all the responses, or at least as many as we'll get right now. So I'll just kind of go through it. So have you run into an issue with a piece of equipment after procurement? So 71% say yes, which is, that's why you're here, right? To hopefully you can share some stories with the rest of them, and the people who said no, you'll be here to learn about how you can use the matrix in the future. Does your organization or project inventory operational technology assets? 72% say yes, or 6% say I don't know, and 22% say no. So this is both in the CIS controls and in the Trusted CI framework. It's important to be able to, do an inventory of all your information assets, but that should include your operational technology assets, not just your normal IT assets. And then does your IT support and cybersecurity program explicitly cover your OT assets, or is it a separate group? And so 61% said our OT assets are included in our cybersecurity program. That's actually more than I would have thought. So maybe things are changing over time. Our OT assets are 28% said our OT assets are managed by a separate group, not part of the cybersecurity program. So that could be, a few things. It could be there's a separate group that manages the OT, but maybe they do some cybersecurity review of that OT. So maybe there's another way of breaking that down even more, but this gives us a good rough idea that things are starting to change and go in a positive direction for all this, I think. So thanks for answering that poll. And I'll go ahead and move on. Okay, so other than it just being not invented here syndrome, why did we decide to make our own questionnaire matrix? Well, first of all, Trusted CI is an organization that focuses on the needs of the science community. So we thought there's probably questions that could be tailored for procurement that would be a little bit more specific to the needs of the science community. There's lots of different sensors to be concerned about, maybe unique sensors that deserve their own questions. Data integrity is a pretty big issue in science, right? We want to make sure that the data coming from the sensors is accurate. There's one of the stories I came across when I was searching for examples of major breaches was where the Chinese government had tampered with the GPS systems to alter the GPS data that was coming from the satellites years ago. I think it was like early 2010s and stuff. So there's a big data integrity issue to be concerned about. Science also has a limited budget. Oftentimes you're buying the equipment at the beginning of your project and there's no opportunity to either change it or buy new equipment later. So we wanted to come up with questions that kept that kind of issue in mind. Long procurement to production process. We've encountered projects that buy their equipment up front and they might not install it for a year or so until it's ready to go into production, or even years. So issues like that kind of drove our thought process for what kind of questions we thought were relevant to ask. We also couldn't readily find a questionnaire tool for operational technology that was already out there and available for use. There was a need in the research community for some kind of solution because we had heard over the years that these kind of issues have come up repeatedly, had engagements with science projects and so on, and during the framework cohort and so on. And it, of course, this aligns with Trusted CI's mission of helping the science community. So our development process for it was, we had several internal meetings where we were brainstorming ideas for what questions to ask and so on, gathering issues from the community. We had interviews with people in the community to try to figure out which questions made sense to ask, and maybe issues with asking those questions, asking those questions to vendors to see how that went. We went through the HECVAT to see, what their approach was to ask questions to vendors and collect them. The HECVAT tends to be, I mean, it's pretty long. Of course, it's only meant to be sent maybe one time to a cloud vendor, and it's kind of a one-to-many thing. Whereas the Trusted CI procurement matrix is more of a one-to-one relationship. So each project might send off their own questions. So that's the big difference with the HECVAT, is that we're not collecting the answers on behalf of the community. We're giving you a template for you to go and ask the vendors. And then consolidate, all the questions, trying to reduce the redundancy and create a set of unique questions so that we could turn, say, 50 questions down to the 23 that we ended up putting into the matrix. And also basing it on CIS control groups and the Trusted CI framework. Since we released the matrix, and I'll get into the matrix in a bit, but just kind of going over the process here. But since we released the matrix, we've done some revisions to it. We found that one of the funnier revisions was that we found that Google Spreadsheets doesn't do spell checking for you. And so we didn't realize it until we exported the spreadsheet to like a standalone Word spreadsheet program, and then it showed all the typos that we had made and stuff like that. So a little embarrassing, but that was one of the revisions that we made. And then we also changed some of the questions a bit to tailor them better based on our first round of use by the community. We create a use guide, so it's not just a spreadsheet that we say go and download, but we actually have a guide for how to go about downloading it, how to go about using it, who to involve in the process, which I'll talk about later. We also promoted the use of it and kind of tracked its use through download metrics, and also promoted at conferences and on this webinar and in discussions and so on. And and we're still thinking about changes that we could make in the future. One of the ones that just came up recently was maybe thinking about not just procurement in the future, but how can the matrix apply to existing operational technology that you already have, and creating mitigation strategies for that operational technology. Maybe collecting a set of common mitigations that are used for various assets and protecting them. That way, if you have existing equipment, and you're not looking to replace it or anytime soon, but you see that there's vulnerabilities in it, you could go to the matrix to get kind of a quick reference of mitigation strategies for it. So the matrix is a spreadsheet that you download, and here's like one page of it, but you can see how we have our ID numbers, which are triple padded, even though we only have 23 questions, but maybe we'll end up with 100 questions someday. And then the type of control it is, whether it's inventory or configuration or data protection and so on, which CIS safeguard it's referencing, kind of it ties back to, and what implementation group, in CIS controls version 8, they started implementing this implementation group strategy so that you can decide where your organization is at as far as its maturity goes and security, which controls you would end up using. So you can kind of say, well, we're an IG1, so these are the types of questions that we would care about. And then, under question, the requirement that this is for, some examples of how this could be exploited, how it connects back with the MITRE ATT&CK system, and also some real world attacks that have happened based on the control. The control has been maybe exploited, or it's meant to address this problem, but here's an actual example of that happening. That way, if the vendor says, well, when is that ever going to happen, you have a actual example that you can give to them, showing that yes, this has happened in the past, and it's something that we need to be concerned about. So there's several pages of this. I'm going to go through a couple sample questions in a second. And so, question number 5 is about CIS control 3.3, the requirement here being the product must provide a mechanism to prevent access to the data. So let's say it's a security camera and it provides some kind of folder for being able to see recorded videos on that security camera. Does it have some kind of access control system in place, like a username and password, to prevent just anybody from going to the IP of the camera and seeing the previous videos? So this would be a question that you ask the vendor: can access to data be restricted to prevent unauthorized access? And hopefully they say yes. The control interface requires a numeric PIN to be entered to access the data. Fine, that's great. Maybe it could be better than that, but at least they have something in place. In general, the ideal answer for a lot of our questions is yes. That we ask them in a way that hopefully that the best answer that they would give starts with yes in some way. You have to manually trigger a spell check in Google Sheets. Thank you. Yes. Sample question number 22. So related CIS control is 12.1. The requirement is network devices which are included as components of the product should be capable of being patched to fix security vulnerabilities. So the question here is, do all network devices included in the product provide a mechanism of patching security vulnerabilities? This could be varied. Yes, there's a web interface where you can upload new firmware, which is available from updates.companyname.com. These are maybe the little details that you need to pay attention to. I mean, if the device might have an upload interface directly on the device that talks directly to a web server on the device. It could be a phone home scenario where the device phones home and checks some kind of folder on the company name for an update. And if that's the case, then you're now dependent on the company being in business, right? Because if they go out of business and the website goes down, then you're at the mercy of whoever maybe registers that domain later. And if they try to do something malicious with the domain name, this kind of thing has happened before. Or it might be, yes, you need to subscribe to a support plan for access to updates. That's another example of the type of thing that has been discovered after the fact. The company or the organization buys some kind of device, they install it in place, and then later they say, oh, there's some kind of security vulnerability, we need to actually update the firmware. And the company comes back and says, oh, okay, you need to subscribe to a support plan, which is $5,000 a year or something like that. And suddenly that's an unexpected expense that you have to make. Or it could be, no, we fired our programming staff after making the product. Hopefully it's not that, but that kind of stuff happens. So these are, good things to know before buying a product, because it probably will play into your decision as to whether you actually buy it or not. So using the matrix. So you first prepare, and the important thing to understand is that, it's not set in stone what you ask the vendors. If you want to customize the matrix template that we give you, by all means, tailor it to your needs. Maybe some of the questions don't even make any sense. Maybe you want to add your own more, questions to it. It's kind of a brainstorming tool and a tool for helping you through the process so that you actually think of questions to ask that maybe you just wouldn't normally think of to ask. So you meet with your team. And I'll go through the steps individually, but basically you prepare as a team. You want to try and involve facility leadership, IT and OT technical staff. So, if this is a effort that is spearheaded by IT, you want to make sure that you include the operational technology staff too, because they're going to have a say in what type of device gets purchased. And they're also going to be the ones that are managing it and so on. Facility leadership is going to make decisions about what actually gets purchased, and they're going to want to know what potential security problems you might have with the asset. Project management staff and procurement staff also, should be part of the project part of the process, project management staff, so that they know what types of efforts will need to go into the product after, it's procured, and maybe down the road, if purchases need to, future purchases need to be made, like a support plan or something like that, so that they can work that into the timeline. The team should identify who's responsible for addressing particular types of vendor questions. Maybe you put another column in place and you put like, Mark is going to ask these questions, Jeanette is going to ask these questions, and so on. Examples include technical staff, such as a cybersecurity plus a appointed risk officer. Maybe you identify them by the group that they're in, and so on. And then, review the matrix questions, identify which are relevant. Not everything is applicable, like I said, and customize the matrix to your needs. Right. You might also care about like various certifications like ISO 9000 or something like that, that's relevant to your organization, or maritime, or international maritime organization rules, or something like that. That might drive the questions that you ask, or you might have extra ones. Then once you come up with this finished matrix, you give it to the vendors of the different products that you're looking at. Hopefully you have more than one choice as far as the product that you're looking at. And this way they see, what is important to your organization. You actually care about the security of the device. How much are they going to care about it? Hopefully they're not just kind of come back and say, oh, this is all proprietary information, get lost. That's not a good way to sell a product. So that might make your decision pretty easy as far as which vendor you actually choose. Make sure that they understand that, if you have any deadline for answering these questions and what to expect back, like, you can give us a simple yes or no to them. If you give a no, you need to justify it somehow, or whatever. Or if you give a yes, you need to explain what is being done to address that concern. Because on the back end, the vendor sales engineer probably, might not know all the answers to the questions that you're sending them. So they probably have to share it back with their development team to be able to answer some of the questions, and maybe have to send it through legal or something like that. So make sure you give them enough time, maybe like a month or so, before you're ready to actually procure the product, so that you can be sure that you have enough time for them to answer. And then hopefully you get the matrix back from the vendor, and the procurement team then meets again and reviews the vendor's responses, determines if the responses are acceptable based on your cybersecurity program. Reach out for support if you have questions about something, the risk of not addressing the security issue that was asked to them, and they said, no, we don't actually address that security issue. Is this going to be a big risk for your organization? Trusted CI is here to help with those kind of questions. Or if the vendor tries to do some hand wavy thing and don't look behind the green curtain or whatever type of thing. Don't be afraid to push them more on it, drafting additional clarifications if it seems like the vendor might have been confused about a question, and then resubmitting it back to them. And if you find that a vendor is confused by a question, I think Trusted CI would be interested to know about that, so that maybe we need to revise the matrix to be more clear. So please feel free to share that kind of feedback with us. And then record the decisions and document what the team decided on, so that if later there's questions about it, or down the road, in 5 years, maybe there's a new group of employees or something, they'll know why it was decided to go with a certain product and what the other options were and why you didn't go with those. So that can help the future to remind you why you made the choices you made. And then, kind of the final the team reviews the responses, trying to develop clarifying questions to send back the vendors. If there's no's from the vendors, there might be mitigating controls that can be used. And this is like what we talked about doing in the future, is coming up with a list of potential mitigating controls. But mostly we'd be basing it on information that's already out there as far as how to mitigate certain risks. Like, for instance, putting a host-based firewall in front of a microscope that's connected to the network so that you can control access to it. That would be an example of a mitigating control if a device didn't provide a mechanism for host access control. And then, of course, the risk is a non-starter for procuring the product, or are you willing to accept that risk? This is why you include facility leadership in the process so that they can make that decision. And then, one thing to keep in mind along all this is that science is the mission. This is must one, is that you're not there to have a perfect cybersecurity program. You're there to protect the science mission and to help the science mission go forward. And sometimes that means taking some risks, security wise. So you have to have this balance, and you have to have this team review of those responses to make those decisions. And then you have your final review, discuss internally, and so on, develop a plan for implementing, mitigating, or compensating controls, plan for the obsolescence of the product. How long are you going to keep it in place before you're going to retire that asset? And what do you need to do when you actually retire it? Do you need to wipe a drive? Do you need to, crush it or something like that? Or do you need to put glue in the Ethernet port? I don't know. There might be something that you do when you decommission the device. And then, are you going to procure it or not? Here's where you actually pull the trigger and you say, okay, we're going to buy it. And then have a asset management plan in place that you develop that will help you guide the process of putting it into place and all the way to obsolescence of the device. So how are we doing on time? Oh, okay. So here's some resources for the matrix. So first of all, is the actual matrix itself. It's a few different versions of basically the questions in different formats, CSV format, spreadsheet format, and so on, that you can download and start using. And then the guide to using the matrix, which is at the Zenodo link. And then we also made a one-pager that's kind of like a brochure for the matrix and helps you quickly get up to speed on it. This might be something that you give to your team if they don't have time to read the whole guide, but you're having a meeting with them and you just want to give them a one-pager to kind of get them up to speed before you get started in a meeting. That might be a great place to use that. So here are those resources. So with that, I'll open the floor to questions and also stories that you may want to share about procurement issues that you've run into.
Yeah, those of you in the audience, if you want to raise your hand, I can enable your microphone if it's easier to just use your microphone versus typing something out. Well, we've got someone commenting that this is great material, thanking you for your work, and that they'll be sharing it with staff. Great, thank you. Please do share.
Yeah, thanks to the Trusted CI team and the Secure by Design team and Trusted CI for putting this all together. I'm just the spokesperson.
Yeah. Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and advance the slide, because I think I've got my reminder for the next webinar, and we'll go. Yeah, thank you. And we'll talk about that and see if anyone types in any questions while we're doing that. So thank you, everybody, for joining this call. Our next webinar is going to be Monday, April 28th at 10 a.m. Central. Our topic is discover and defend cyber vulnerabilities of deep learning medical diagnosis models to adversarial attacks. So I think this presenter could benefit from the Matrix because when we're developing medical devices, obviously those things are very you know important to have good cybersecurity around them. Our presenter is Shandong Wu, and I will be posting a registration link for that in a couple weeks. Last call for questions. I threw in links to the slideshow, links to the our Zenodo Matrix citation so that you can download it and share it with colleagues. Mark, do you have any other final thoughts or advice for those who are listening and watching?
Well, thanks everybody for joining, and feel free to reach out to Trusted CI if you have questions about the use of the Matrix.
It looks like we got a question come in. What is the legal dividing line between buyer liability for OT compromise / malfunction versus provider liability?
I'm not a lawyer, so if there's somebody from the Trusted CI side that could answer this, that would be helpful. You can just raise your hand and Jeanette can unmute you.
I don't see some of our legal Trusted CI team members on this call.
Yeah. We do have people on staff who are lawyers, and they might be able to provide a better answer than I would feel comfortable providing as far as legal issues go. Sorry, I can't help you more.
Okay, well, I think we might be able to follow up with this question offline, perhaps. Okay, any other questions? Mark, again, thank you for presenting. I think we want this to be a very usable, customizable product for our community. So any of you out there who are using it or have feedback for us, we are happy to accept your feedback. We had a comment from someone about this legal question. One approach would be to define liability in the contract before procurement. Yeah, that seems reasonable.
Yeah, and of course, this would be something that you'd want to get your legal counsel involved in if you have concerns about that. If you're at a university, you might be able to leverage your legal counsel at the university to help with that contract, or if you have somebody on retainer that's for your organization.
Okay, well, thanks again, Mark, for your time, and thanks everybody for joining the call. I'll be sending out the slides and the video for this, so you're encouraged to share this with your colleagues. Mark, have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.